this investigation. And she has kind of a unique perspective because she's been there 10 years, so she believes it's her home. She loves this place. But it's also not long enough that the people who've been there for generations truly see her as an insider. So she's kind of has that insider and outsider perspective.
I think a lot of readers love learning something when they're reading something entertaining. And in this case, with your book, I had never heard of the words dark tourism or the concept. Can you explain what that is? Because that's tied into your book.
Yeah, it's the idea that, you know, people are drawn to sites where, you know, tragic things have occurred. And, you know, I think there's a lot of different layers to this, and it's something it's also the idea of, like, it's bringing attention to something, and, you know, maybe it's helping bring more attention to these cases, but then it's also the idea of, you know, this is a mystery, this is an urban legend, but this is also a tragedy for people. And, you know, trying to balance both of those elements.
Setting plays a strong, important role in your books, and woods seem to feature in a lot of your stories. Talk about setting as a character and why you go back to the woods.
Yes, so I joke with my editor that I always set a book either in the woods or by water. Woods this time, like hardcore woods. So I think I love setting in general, and I'll say, like, I always start with a character, and this book, the first character I thought of was the town itself of Cutter's Pass, and that is the first character I came up with. And I love the idea that any place can be the most beautiful place in the world or the most terrifying. And, you know, the place is the place. It's really your perspective that changes it. And, you know, you can love a place, and then if something tragic happens or if a character's afraid, then everything takes on like an element of danger. And, you know, you can look, so I went hiking while I was writing this book trying to see the terrifying things in it, which I do not recommend doing without a partner. But, you know, you look and you think this is beautiful, okay, like there's a tunnel of trees, you can get lost in it. Oh, you can get lost in it. Oh, you can step off the trail and not find your way back. So I think setting has such a duality to it, and I love kind of playing with that element of showing the different characters' perspectives, kind of based on how they're feeling about the setting.
Duality is a good word for your writing in general, because in the case of Cutter's Pass, it's a small town, and Abigail kind of bridges both aspects. She's been there for 10 years, I think, or something like that, but she's really not part of that town's core. Not
yet, no. It's a very tight-knit town, and, you know, I think there's sort of this inherent trade-off that Abby starts realizing, like, you can be accepted here and call this place your home as long as you promise to keep our secrets and not go digging. And so for 10 years, she said, well, it doesn't look like there's anything dangerous here. I'm happy to go along with that. And then suddenly she finds a piece of evidence that changes that perspective and has to kind of decide, you know, am I going to upend basically the life I've built for myself here, because she knows what it's going to be like if she starts digging into people's lives. They're going to, like, close her off very quickly. But she was very fortunate because she was kind of vouched for by the owner of the inn as a family member. And so she was automatically accepted in, I think she says at one point, like, I'm invited to the weddings, I'm invited to the big things, but I'm not truly aware.
She doesn't go to the potlucks.
Exactly, exactly. So she finds herself drawn more to the people who work there seasonally. Same as her, like, they're not from there, but they come and they work in sort of the tourism industries. Like, her best friend is like the river rafting center manager, and that's who she kind of has found as her group. But she finds the group of people who are her age there has been a very difficult group to crack.
Sometimes I think readers don't realize that even when you're writing a novel, there's research involved.
Yes.
I mean, you can make things up, but some things have to be grounded in reality. What kinds of research did you do for The Last to Vanish? Was there a lot of outdoorsy kind of river rafting stuff? Or?
So there was a lot of outdoorsy stuff. I will say, so I grew up hiking. My parents are avid hikers. They still are. And then when I turned 18 and I was like, I don't have to go hiking anymore, I kind of stopped hiking. And then I had kids of my own, and suddenly I was like, you know, it sounds like a great idea. Let's go hiking. But, like, when you're hiking with your children, you're not thinking to yourself, these are the terrifying things I want to incorporate into my book. So I really did take several research trips while I was writing this just with that in mind, and to go in different seasons as well.
Yeah.
So we went in the winter, well, we went in November, and thinking, like, just observing and experiencing it and seeing, like, the trees are bare, you can see forever. And I thought to myself, well, this is really cool because nobody could sneak up on me. Like, I can see forever here. But on the flip side, like, I can't hide. There's nowhere to hide, you know, and I'm not very fast, so I will be caught very quickly. And then, you know, going in the summer as well. And I went to several different mountain towns very close to the Appalachian Trail. And when I went to a little town called Hot Springs in North Carolina, which is such this beautiful mountain town, and the Appalachian Trail goes right through the center. It's like there's a trail marker on the sidewalk. And I hiked like in the middle of August, like in weather that felt like this, and I got home and I was like, must make everything hotter. Like everything in these summer hike scenes must be hotter. So a lot of it was like that. We stayed at local inns, lots of different bed and breakfasts, also went to Virginia. So that was kind of the fun research. I also did research about disappearances on the Appalachian Trail and about just disappearances in general in kind of like the wild areas, and you know how many people, like how many people do disappear, or how easy it is to get lost. Usually they're found right away, but just different elements like that of what a search might look like.
Well, I think that's another kind of that questioning value of your books, because when someone disappears, you don't know, did someone take them? Did they choose to do it?
Exactly.
That's
exactly. You don't even know if it's a crime, right? Yeah. Exactly.
Did you have to do a lot of research into innkeeping? Because you do include some details in there.
I do include some details. So I stayed at several, and I stayed like kind of, it was the first place I went after things started opening up. And so everything was still very like, you know, no contact, but it was, I actually thought, I got a really good sense of, you know, in these small places, all the things that were done, because they were kind of like listed for you, like, you know, this is what to do here. And it was actually really, really interesting to be doing that without seeing people. But I also made it up because the place is fictional. And I love making towns up. I love, you know, making every place up so that you can make it just a unique place with its own unique rules. But it was interesting to think about, like, what are the specific quirks of a place like this? And they offer guided hiking tours because they don't want people disappearing on their watch. So you kind of think about, like, okay, it's an inn, but it's also an inn in this town. So what are the specifics that are going to make this place unique, what it is? Yep.
You also, in all of your books, write a lot about the dynamics between female characters, the role they have. And in some ways, women do have that dual kind of friend, or are they a competitor? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love the nuances of relationships. Like I think, you know, just like we were talking about settings, it's this idea of, you know, there's so many different layers to relationships. And in different books, I feel like I tackled different elements of it. Some of the books, it is about power dynamics. Some of it's really just about really intense friendships and, you know, how you are reflected in other people's minds and how people act differently with other people and how the group of people around you almost create who you become. In this book in particular, I think the most important relationship is sort of a mentor figure, and it's the owner of the inn, and I think she even is a little bit of a mother figure to her, because Abby came to the town when she was 18. She had just lost her mother, and Celeste is the manager of this inn. She's very tough love, but I love the dynamic of their relationship, and Abby always says she can tell Celeste cares by the things she entrusts to her care, like that she lets her handle these things, but she's not going to give you a compliment and like a pat on the back, like, good job. She'll just let you keep doing it.
In addition to the duality in your writing, you kind of have a duality yourself. You have a scientific nature, your background from MIT and working in the biosciences, and then there's your artistic side. Do you think, is your goal to blend those two together? Yeah,
I feel like maybe, I don't think they're that different, really. Okay. Like when I'm writing, I feel like I use both. Like I use the science, the things I would use in science, I'm still using when I'm writing. So I don't do a lot of plotting up front. So I feel like that's the creative part. But while I'm writing, I have like Excel spreadsheets open, And that's where I'm like creating my outline as I'm going, and I have like running columns for clues and like reveals and dangling plot threads. So I feel like it is methodical in the same way that science is when you're building a mystery and you're discovering the puzzle pieces. And I feel like there's mysteries at the hearts of both of those things that you're trying to solve.
I think I read, I might be incorrect, that you owe your career to Post-its.
Yes, the beginning of my career was all about multicolored sticky notes. Like that was how I plotted books. I had like a whiteboard, and I would like come up with an idea and stick it somewhere, and it would start creating an arc as I was going. But recently I've moved that process into my computer, and I have this giant monitor. Like it's enormous, and I like pull everything up at the same time. So it's kind of like having a board for sticky notes. It's just, I won't lose them anymore. They stay in my computer.
Well, I think when you're writing suspense or mystery, there's some very practical things about that for you as an author, because maybe some authors can wing it and just start off and see where it goes. But for your plot, you have to know X happens here, so Y is going to happen there. How do you approach your book projects? Do you kind of know that in advance? Do you have to go back and reverse engineer?
I feel like there's a much better way to write books than the way I write books, but I also feel like I have embraced it kind of as my process now. I do when I start, I feel like I have a character and a premise, and I have a good sense of like who that character is, what she's afraid of, and what things have happened in her past. And I really just start writing. And I do not let myself get past like 50 pages before I step back and see turning points. And I do revise as I go. So I figure things out as I'm going. And I think because I feel like I take most of my cues from the characters and the relationships, I feel like I can't know their decisions until I get to know what those relationships are like, and that's through writing. So my first draft is very much a discovery draft, and I wish I could see a whole book before I started, but it's also fun for me, and I write first person. My main character doesn't know what happened, so I like going in that way. I feel like I can connect to that emotion, that uncertainty, and that fear, and that like I don't trust any of the characters, because she doesn't know who did it, and I don't know who did it at the start either. So it helps to kind of, have that mysterious angle to it.
So you really are more of a character-driven when it comes to writing. You have to have the character first.
I have to have the character first. Everything comes from that.
And didn't you write one of your books almost in reverse?
I did. So All the Mystic Girls is my first book for adults, and it's told primarily in reverse. So it starts on day 15, moves back in time to day 1. And I was fascinated by the idea to do this because I wanted it to like explore character motivation. So every day you're moving back in time, you're stripping away another layer of why something happened. And I wrote it in the order that it's read. So I'm sure there was a more efficient way to do this. But I wrote it that way so that every time I would figure something out, I'd have to go back and change things because those happen chronologically afterwards. So it was a constantly evolving draft, and that required a lot of lists, like what the narrator knows at any given time versus what the reader knows at any given time, and you're trying to like walk that narration line between the two. But I'm fascinated by structure and like the way stories are told and why.
You've been writing now for a number of years. As you look back on your career, what do you know now that you wish you could have told yourself at the beginning? Don't do it, or?
Yeah. It's funny because like when I started, I thought I'm going to write a book, and it kind of like, it's wild to me that this is book number 13, and also like I love that this is book number 13, which is very urban legendy and creepy. I've learned a lot. I feel like I learn with every single book. I learned a lot just about plotting throughout my first few. I learn something new in every given book. I think I've learned most to just embrace my process, and that a career is long, and careers they don't always look like this. They kind of look like this. I love the writing, and I love to be able to tell these types of stories, and I just keep doing it.
What advice would you give to an aspiring writer?
Okay, so the advice I give and I would give to myself as well. It might seem very simple, but it was basically like, just read everything. And this, when I set out to, I was always a big reader, but when I set out to write my first book, I started reading everything I could get my hands on, even in genres that I wasn't thinking of writing in, and just thinking about like what makes me care, what makes me want to keep reading, what makes me invested in these characters in this world, what's the feeling it leaves you with. And the other thing is really to just keep writing, because I feel like it's like any skill, any sport, you can't get better until you just keep doing it. And I feel like everyone has a very unique either perspective or voice, and to really embrace that, because I think those are the things that make your book stand out.
How would you describe your writing voice to someone who has never read
How would you describe my writing voice? I'm not sure.
I would say quietly intense.
Oh, thank you. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to say quietly intense. Thank you.
The last 2 years in particular have been tough on everyone, but writers too. How did that affect your career? I mean, you couldn't go on tours like this today, but in other ways, did it affect your writing? Didn't it? Because you normally stay at home and write?
So I'm used to writing from home. I'm very glad that I could just pivot to like still working in my office. I was not used to everyone else being home during that time, and my children doing middle school and high school right outside of my office. So, you know, obviously my process changed. I was getting up earlier to write. I was writing in the evenings a little bit more, where usually I'm very structured during the work day, like the school day. But I mean, just, you know, mentally, I think it was also very hard to get to a creative place when you have everything that's going on in the world and you're thinking about it. And so, I mean, to be honest, I went a long chunk of time where I'd started such a quiet place before the pandemic began, but it sat for a few months with like no progress for a while. And I think it feels like my pandemic book because it's set in a neighborhood, like no one leaves this neighborhood. Like it's like a locked box neighborhood. But I thought of it before, but I do think thematically that pulled even tighter, as like my entire world right then was my neighborhood, and how much you relied on your neighbors and how much like this was like the boundaries of your world at that time. So I think it made it into thematically in the book as well. And then I went from that to being like, we're going out to the mountains, like we're getting outside and we're writing this book next. So I feel like maybe it also impacted the setting in this book.
You mentioned that you got your love of reading from your mom's bookshelves and the mystery and suspense books there. What do you look for as a reader? Can you turn off your writer brain and look at a book and say, this is what I want when I'm reading, in suspense or any other genre?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can turn it off. The thing that I can't turn off is like I must try and find the twists that someone is writing in their book. And so when I am surprised, it's like I will remember this book forever, because then you're going back like, how did they do it? Where was that? Where was that clue? I love being surprised. But the thing that sticks with me as a reader is like the feeling. And you know, there's books from my childhood that I can remember just like a feeling that it left me with, and that's something that I think about a lot when I'm writing. Like, what's the feeling you want to leave someone with at this point? You know, besides like fear in thrillers, but like that type of connection. And sometimes, you know, you read something in a story that, you know, connects with you, and it makes you, it's like almost a conversation. Like you realize other people are having these, you know, thoughts and experiences too. So.
What kind of feeling do you want readers to take away from the last Vanish?
Oh, you know, I think it's a story about love of a place and acceptance and wanting to belong, and like those types of feelings wrapped up also within a tense mystery, and having to make those decisions of, you know, these are people that you love and people that you care about, and yet you're discovering that, you know, these tragedies might be tied up in their worlds, and I think that's the tension that really drives stories forward, more than like the tension of the plot, but like those decisions and that push and pull inside the characters as well.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, because in a lot of your books, there's those moments where if something had gone a different way, the entire story takes a different direction.
Yeah.
What have you been reading that you want to suggest to other readers? I know you have one that you continually.
Yeah, so this is a book that I continually talk about. I love Tim Johnston's Descent, and if you also like books that are set in nature, this is such a well done story of it's brother and sister who are out on I think it's in the Rockies, and the sister gets taken. And she's disappeared, and you see it's really about family. You get the story from the father's perspective, the brother's perspective, and it's just beautifully done. Also, a thriller, and like the nature in it is just to die for. So definitely always recommend that, and that is a book that like will leave you with a feeling, 100%. Some other books that I've been reading and loving this year, a few of my favorites that came out this year are Kelly Garrett's Like a Sister, El Casamano's Finley Donovan series. She had another book come out this year.
That's such a bananas premise, but she makes it work.
It is. It's so fun, and it's like mystery and funny. Recently, I read Riley Sager's House Across the Lake, and we were talking before, big Riley Sager fans here. Always love those books. And there's also a book coming out, I think in a couple weeks, that I read early, and it's really unique. It's called My Dirty California by Jason Mosberg. And it's hard to explain. It has many different layers to it, but it kind of kicks off where somebody comes home and is trying to figure out who murdered his brother and father, and it sends him into like the underworld in California. And also, like, he meets up with a journalist who believes her father, like, went to another dimension. So it's got, like, science fiction angles to it, but it's also just, like, a really interesting literary thriller. Definitely recommend that. I could keep going.
Let's talk a little bit about the business side of writing for you. What surprised you the most once you became published about? You can't just write a book. There's other things.
Yeah, I think that is the big surprise. I mean, there's the creative side to it, and there's the business side to it. And, you know, they're not always completely in line. And sometimes one is the priority, like, okay, I'm in the headspace of working on a draft, and this is like the creative side. But then there is the business side to it. And there's, you know, how a book fits into the market. You know, I think a book is always in conversation with like books around it too. Like, where does it kind of fit in? And it's been also a learning experience over the last 10 years. And I've written in different markets too. I've written in young adult. I've written in adult. One of my young adults had a little bit science fiction. You know, now I'm more in psychological suspense. So yeah, I feel like that was also a learn by do. There was not really a course of like what the business of writing is like until you're in it.
You're thrown in.
Yes, and I mean, I didn't even know the process of publication, like, you know, all the edits and then the copy edits and then past pages, like all those terms were new to me when I was hearing them the first time. Like,
and today, I think especially writers have to also learn the art of self-promotion.
Right.
Are you on social media? Do you have favorite platforms? What's your relationship with that?
Yeah, so I believe in doing the things that you enjoy in terms of any sort of like self-promotion, and I love talking to book clubs, and I'm able to do that over Zoom, which is amazing. So that's something I love to do. And I'm on Instagram a lot. I'm just gonna say, like, you can find me there. I'm probably on there more than I should be, but I really enjoy that. I get a lot of book recommendations from there, and I feel like I'm able to talk to readers in that way too. So those are kind of the two places I'm mainly, book clubs and Instagram.
Book clubs can be a double-edged sword for an author. I mean, you want to be honest with them, but when people are honest about your books, how do you deal with that?
So usually what I do, and I'll say, like, because it's over Zoom, you guys, you have your discussion and, you know, talk about all the things you want to talk about, the things you didn't like and things you liked, and then I'll come in for 20 minutes of Q&A, like ask me the questions you want to hear about. And, you know, sometimes they are like, why did I do this, or what the plot is. So, no, I find them really interesting too, because I feel like every reader brings something specific to a book, and they see things in there that maybe weren't my intention, and then now I'm looking in it like, I do think that was that. Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like there's like another element when you put a book out into the world that the reader adds to.
Another aspect of getting your book in front of readers is book jackets and titles. How much input do you have? Because you've had some really terrific
I'm pretty lucky in the cover department.
Covers, yeah.
Yeah, so will say I can take no credit for them. Like
Okay.
I love them. I'm not a visual
Is your
person.
editor listening in, or?
Yeah. So I do have input. You know, I'm usually see several different ideas, and there's usually one that we all agree, like, this is the right direction for the book. And sometimes there's like little fine details we talk about. I think in this book it was like, I love the idea that there was the town in the background that you could see, and that was kind of how I imagined the town itself. And so there was a version where it was foggier and you couldn't see it, and I liked that you could see it. And so, I mean, it's little tiny things is my input. They come up with the brilliant concepts all on their own.
I know for some authors they have to have the title in mind when they start, and there's others who have written the book and it's still title to be determined.
Yes, I have turned in a book that said book 5. Like, that's how I turned it in once. Yes.
That you don't have to anchor it to the title. You can write without it.
I like to, but I also know that they're probably going to change. My titles are usually a conversation. And I also think sometimes they have to come at the end, because it's like something you don't know until you're there, like something that ties it through thematically.
That's part of your process.
Yeah,
if you're exploring the book as a writer, you can't.
Right. So I can tell you what my working title for was this. It was named after something very specific that was in this town. There's a trail right behind the inn that leads to Appalachian, and it's called the Shallow Falls Trail, but the visitors call it the Vanishing Trail, because that's where people go missing. Wow. And that is what I was calling it at the start, was the Vanishing Trail. And then we were having like a brainstorm, and I felt like this title, The Last to Vanish, works in so many different ways. Yeah. The book is it's structurally broken up by missing person. So it starts with the most recent disappearance. The story does move forward, but you're learning about the most recent disappearance, and each clue brings you to the next, and then you're at the last to vanish, and then it's the last to vanish before that. Yeah. And I actually thought about the structure itself a little bit like a trail, too, that Abby was following.
Oh, where you're following the trail, you don't necessarily see ahead, and then you turn the corner, and
then you're at the next.
You see the next viewpoint. Yep. Wow, you are smart, aren't you? I think we've probably gone on for long enough. I think you may have a few questions. Do we have anyone that would like to ask Megan a question? Don't make her call on you. I think we've got one there.
Do you see yourself going back to the occasional YA, if nothing else, as a path to bring more readers to your adult book?
Oh, that's an interesting question. You know, I don't think about it so much as like a path to bring readers one way. I found that readership kind of shifts both ways. I have adult readers who read my YA, and I have, YA who read the adult, because I think in the content, they're not that different. It's really about the character and the experience. I won't say I wouldn't write YA again. I do think it really is about like the story you come up with and the character that it's best suited for. And sometimes that's what the decision is. Like, you come up with a character, you think of their premise, and then you think to yourself, this is more suited for a character who's discovering things for the first time, or this is more suited to a character who's had this other experience that's going to impact who they are as an adult. And right now, the ideas I'm coming up with are all kind of in this realm. Somebody in an interview a few years ago asked me to describe my book in 3 words, and I said the past returns, and I realized that describes every single one of my adult books. So I feel like, that's sort of the thing that I'm really interested in exploring.
What books do your middle school and high school kids read, and do you read books as well?
Yeah, so they're both big readers too, and now I'm going to blank on everything they're reading. So my daughter is 16, and interestingly, what she's reading for summer reading is On Writing by Stephen King, and I'm like, I would love to read that again with you. But she reads a lot of YA. I know one of her favorite authors is a suspense writer, April Henry. I love her books as well. My son, and I said they're both big Alan Gratz fans, who's a North Carolina writer. Yeah, so my son likes fantasy as well. So they're pretty broad readers. And I used to, read with them when they were younger. And now I feel like they're more reading up to like the books that I have. Like, I see gaps on my shelf and I'm like, where'd that book go? That's right. And they're reading them.
Question there.
How do you come with your plots? Is it like current events or your own background? Or?
Yeah. A little bit of both. Like sometimes there's an inspiration point, but then it takes on a life of its own. So this book in particular, the idea for the town, which gave rise to all these disappearances, came when my kids. So I live in North Carolina, and my kids take field trips to Charleston, and they go on these historical ghost tours. And
We just did that.
it's amazing. So this was kind of the inspiration for the idea where they came home and they were telling me about it. And I thought to myself, what if there was a place where that history is really recent instead? And it's, these are still things that are happening, and yet they're still treating it like
The past.
Yeah. And yet all these people are involved in it. I mean, one of them happened 4 months ago, and Abby's like, "Don't add me to your ghost tour. Like, this is a site. We're looking for him still." So it comes from that sometimes, but usually it's like The Girl from Widow Hills is about this event that happened to a character when she was 6 years old, and it was something that was like national media. And I was just really interested in what it would be like to be part of a story that you didn't want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And so that gave rise to the idea of this girl who changed her name, wanted nothing to do with that, but the media definitely wants
She
to
can't
know.
escape her past.
Yes, and she's called the Girl from Widow Hills still. Yep. The past returns.
Other questions? I think we've got some from online.
I do,
Okay.
as I knock over wrapping paper. So Nissa Joy Armstrong wants to know, what did your characters in the book teach you, and what do you want readers to take away from this book?
Ooh. So I'd say the characters in my book, it's weird because you create them, but then they take on this life of their own. And my characters are all much braver than I am. Like, if I'm not going into the woods to track down a missing person case. And I actually really enjoy reading and seeing these characters do these things that I would be leery to do. Like, I'm going to solve this from behind the computer screen. And so that's something, I feel like the risk taking is maybe something that I think about my characters doing that I'm like, okay, they would do that. They would do that. As far as what I would want readers to take away, I really hope you enjoy the story. Like, I love mysteries and suspense because I think it's about it's a puzzle and a mystery, but it's also like the mysteries inside other people, and I feel like that's like the journey and the experience, and what people take from that kind of varies based on whether it's the plot or the character or the relationships.
I think you've said that you start with your character, and then it's the writing process is putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yes, it is. It's kind of, when I'm reading a book, you're seeing the pieces and you're trying to say, okay, what is this? What's the reveal? And then when you're writing it, I feel like you discover the clues and then you try and create something from it. Yeah, it's fun.
Do you ever find that because there's so many authors writing psychological suspense, it's like plot ideas you have suddenly get moved out of the equation because somebody else has beat you to the punch?
I feel like there's sometimes you'll hear a concept and you're like, oh, that's close. But it's really, and then you read the book and you're like, no, because every writer brings their own story and voice to it. So I don't shy away from that because I feel like everyone's is going to be unique. And sometimes I think there's something in the atmosphere because there'll be like several books coming out very thematically similar. I mean, it's definitely happened with mine. And you're like, there's something in the air we've been thinking about that gives rise to similar types of concepts and ideas.
It's out there, and it's also when publishers see something successful, they're more than willing to
That's true too.
Push books in that direction too.
I can see that.
Is there a particular suspense book you wish you had written that you've read?
I would say I wish I had written because I admire so many of the authors that are publishing right now, and I find them really inspirational because you read every time I read something that's great and it resonates and you put it down and you're like, oh, I'm so inspired to go write to try and create something like that too. That leaves
Wow, so you're nice too, in addition to being talented. Other questions for Megan?
It's interesting because you mentioned that you still read mystery books, and a lot of authors that have been here said they had to stop because you never want to be caught up without even maybe realizing you're copying the plot. So it's interesting that you still do that. Obviously, the answer is no, you have not found yourself doing that.
Well, I will say, so when I'm writing a book and it does seem like a similar concept, I won't read something similar. And that's almost because I don't want to get in my own head about it, too, because if I did read a similar plot point, I'd be like, I can't do that. Even if it's the right choice for that character in the book, I think I would take it in an unnatural direction because I didn't want to. So I just don't read them until I finish my book and it's kind of into production. And then I read them and I'm like, okay. Wasn't that similar, but I agree. Like it's hard to not be in your head one way or another about it. Yeah.
Questions? Way in the back.
Okay, that's a great question. So it's about what are the ways I work to get past writer's block. And so first I'll say writer's block for me usually comes in two different forms. One of them is because I don't do a lot of upfront plotting. One of them is I have gone in the wrong direction, and that is why I cannot see where to go from here, because the answer is to go backward and figure out where I took a wrong turn. And so sometimes the answer is deleting. But one of my writing friends had given me the advice of like writing out 50 outlandish things. Like they can just be the most out of this world things, but writing them down, it kind of opens up something new in you, opens up different possibilities. The other way, like middles for me are the hardest part of writing a book, because beginnings are like fun, I don't have to figure things out yet. Endings, you've done all the work so that those pieces are coming together, but middles are so difficult for me. And sometimes it's just like, I don't want to write this scene. I can't see all the pieces, and I like to be able to see everything that I'm writing, and sometimes I don't start it until I can kind of envision it. And so for myself, I give myself like the flexibility to just say, just write the dialogue, don't worry about anything else. Or just write the action, don't worry about anything else. Get through it, move on to the next part, and you can come back to it. But for me, the biggest hurdle is that blank page. I like revision because, I feel like you're fine-tuning everything. But just, tricks to get things down on the page or to realize that I have to go back and rethink the direction.
I think some authors can get frozen by wanting to write something perfect.
Yes.
And
yes.
That's what editing and revision is for.
Right. Nobody wants to see my first draft, trust me. Nobody.
Any other questions for Megan?
One more online. Renee Herskovitz wants to know, are you working on another book?
So I actually just turned in my first draft last night. So I don't want to say too much about it because it's a first draft and things can change dramatically. But like I said earlier, how I love to either do woods or water. We're back to the water this time. We're out in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. It's about a group of people they're together for a reunion about something that has happened in their past. And I'll leave it at that.
Looks like we may be ready for people to sign books. Before we do that, how can readers learn more about your books? Do you have a website?
I do. I have a website, it's meganmiranda.com. Again, I post a lot on Instagram, and that's Megan L. Miranda. And I do have a newsletter on my website as well. I'm going to keep up on email.
If we don't have any other questions for Megan Miranda, I'd like to thank you for visiting us at the Poison Pen.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming. This was so fun.
We're going to get Megan set up at the table here for signing, so give her a few minutes while we move furniture. You should have tickets in your books with numbers, and normally we have you line up